Earlier this week, I put out a video breaking down Enzo Maresca's tactics and how it compared to Poch's last system, but a lot of you guys in the comments had questions about certain players, where they fit into this system, and what our strongest lineup under the Italian would be. So I thought I'd get the tactics board out, address some of those queries, and show what I personally believe our best lineup would be. The first thing that I want to talk about is the formation, because I had a lot of people in my comments saying that Enzo Maresca does not play a 4-2-3-1 and that he plays a 4-3-3. And I'm here to kind of debunk that and say, well, it doesn't really matter in the grand scheme of things, because the 4-2-3-1 and the 4-3-3 are basically the same thing. See, here I've got a 4-2-3-1, and it is just a 4-3-3, but even though it's set up in a 4-2-3-1. Now obviously the two systems have slight differences. In a 4-3-3 usually you'd have a bit of a wider midfield with this space being opened up and not being occupied by a player, and also the wingers being a bit deeper in a 4-2-3-1, but apart from that it is just the same system, and even though they do have their differences, it doesn't really matter in the grand scheme of things for this formation under Enzo Maresca because of the way he plays. As I spoke about in that last video, which you can watch, it will be linked in the top right hand corner and in the description, so if you missed that you can watch that. As I spoke about in that last video, the system will always change into a 3-2-2-3 or a 3-2-5, similar to what we saw with Poch, but instead of it being the left-sided fullback inverting this side with Enzo Maresca and how Leicester played, it's always the right-sided fullback that will invert into the midfield. So what will end up happening is we'll have this same box midfield system that we usually saw from Poch, and then obviously the centre-backs will shift across to occupy the width. Now, I'm going to talk about certain players, but obviously I'm going to talk about it in the context of this system. The first player I want to mention, because a lot of people were bringing him up, was Mykhailo Mudryk, and where Mykhailo Mudryk fits into this team. We know, because of how Enzo Maresca's team kind of functions and the way that I kind of spoke about it, so I'm going to replace Nkunku at the moment for Mudryk, just so I can get this point across. If Mudryk's in the team, he's going to play in this left wing role. I don't think that's very debatable, but I just don't think that he's going to get in the left wing role overall, especially if we bring in a new winger in the summer. Now, as I mentioned in that game, if we set up here with a back four, against most teams, the idea behind how Enzo's team works is that they want to create 1v1s. So with this four in midfield, obviously we've spoken about this usually outnumbering opposition midfields and having three players here. And we want to create 1v1s if one of the centre backs comes out to match up here, then you get these 1v1s operating out wide with the two wingers and with the striker and the remaining centre back. And the point of this system is that the wingers in Enzo Maresca's team, that were Mavididi and Fatawu, they were very, very good 1v1 wingers. They were very, very good at taking on their men, and they kind of try to force these 1v1s in order to create those opportunities. And the reason why I bring this up in terms of Mykhailo Mudryk is that I think that this is something that Enzo is going to try and do with our team. Obviously, Madueke, we know Madueke is a very, very good one-on-one attacker. When he is isolated against a fullback, he usually gets the better of them, whether that's going on the inside, which he doesn't do as often, but mainly going around the outside, getting to the byline and then putting balls into the box. That's something he's very, very good at. And this team is set up to kind of create those opportunities. Mudryk, on the other hand, I don't think is as good as a one-on-one attacker as Madueke is, but he still does have that quality to beat a man, especially if he's doing that thing which I mentioned previously, where he drops deep to collect the ball, and when the player follows him, he will usually try and spin in behind and create this space this way. So I think he can operate that way, and if he is in the starting 11, I think that's how he's going to kind of operate. I think he will be just basically the Steffi Mavididi of this team, and that he will try and take on his man, get into attacking areas behind where the space is, and if not, then he'll probably just interchange with whoever's in this role. I put Gallagher here, but most notably it probably would be Nkunku. It depends on whether Gallagher gets sold. Obviously, it's a big talking point of this summer is going to be whether Conor Gallagher gets sold. If he's not playing here, I think Nkunku will play here. This is a very good position for Nkunku to play as an inside forward, because we've seen from how Enzo Maresca's team operates is that these two midfielders that in the inside 10 position play really, really close to the striker. And what this allows us to do is then push the wingers really, really wide. And we saw this similar thing happen when we were using this 3-2-5 with Poch, right? We saw both the wingers getting really, really wide, stretching the opposition, creating the gaps here between the centre-backs. Obviously, that's a bit exaggerated when you usually have 4 centre-backs here, but whichever player here will usually try and occupy one of the centre-backs. So if this is Nkunku or Palmer, one of them will be occupied, and you'll get those 1v1s that we spoke about earlier. Now, I spoke a little bit about Nkunku there, and though this is one of the positions he can take up, I did mention in my other video that he may be the player that plays out wide here, and Mudryk may not actually start. We don't know. Again, if we get a new winger, like we've been quoted to possibly be getting Somerville or Nico Williams, if either of those two come in, I think they will start on this side, and Nkunku probably won't play here. But overall, I think Nkunku is a better player than Mudryk, obviously, and even though he's not as comfortable as a winger as Mudryk is, I still think he would get in the team over him. If he's not playing there, he will obviously, as I said, probably play in this position, but the one position which I haven't really mentioned that Nkunku could operate in is in the actual striker role. Obviously, Nicholas Jackson is going to be our starting striker if we do not bring one in. There's been talks recently that we've abandoned the idea of getting Osimhen, which I believe is a good move. I think spending that amount of money on a striker that is getting comparable numbers to Jackson is a silly decision, and especially when Jackson is so good, so young, so has so much potential, and his hold-up play, which is something that is very important in this system because of how I spoke about before with the striker having to drop. I think he's adequate enough for us to continue playing this way, and it's that way that he plays that I think suits Nkunku too. And obviously we've spoken about, in my previous video, we spoke about how the striker has to occupy these positions, but sometimes drop into the midfield to create a 5v4. And I think Nkunku as a false 9 can do that. Obviously, we've seen him play as a 9 for us in pre-season and a few times in the actual regular season, and he was decent at it. Not the greatest position for him. Obviously, he's usually better as a second striker, which is why I think this position would suit him a little bit more, with us having a winger out here, whoever it may be. But that's just another position that I think Nkunku could operate in. I saw a lot of people asking me where Nkunku would probably fit into this team. Obviously, again, another striker we've kind of been linked with is Benjamin Sesko. If he comes in, I would imagine that Jackson would probably play as a winger, or with obviously Sesko here and Nkunku in this left 10 role. Or I think he would just play as second fiddle to Sesko, or vice versa. Whichever one we decide is our starting striker, the other one will just substitute in. Obviously, Jackson has been our solo striker since January because Broja has got booted out into Fulham, and he's basically been having to use this position as his own for the entirety of the season. So I think giving him a bit of a break, especially with the extra games that we're going to have with the UEFA Conference League, I think he'll obviously operate here. With probably interchanging with the other striker if we do bring one in. Okay, now the next player that I want to talk about is another midfielder, and this is Enzo Fernandez, because I didn't mention Enzo. I mentioned him briefly in the first video, but because I was kind of comparing him to how Poch ended the season, he obviously wasn't playing because he was injured, so I didn't really mention him. People have been kind of questioning where he would play and how he would operate in this team. I think there's two positions that he would probably operate in. The first is in this forward left inside 10, and I think where Gallagher would usually operate. I think Gallagher would be out of the team. I think Enzo would operate here, and though people are going to have immediate question marks about this and him playing up so high, because we saw it when we were playing under Poch, that him being pushed this high was not very beneficial for him. I think he can operate in a more advanced role. It just has to be with two midfielders back, right? So what we were having before is that we were having Enzo push really, really high with Caicedo as this lone centre mid, and it didn't help us build out from the back. And because we couldn't build out from the back, it just meant that Enzo was never getting the ball, and he was kind of really pushed up high here next to the centre-backs rather than in this position where he can actually dictate play and play passes into the box. If he is operating in this position, in this 4, I think he can operate here perfectly fine, and obviously if we are playing a bit of a fluid system, eventually the team might end up kind of operating a bit like this, with Enzo dropping a bit deeper to collect the ball if the ball goes over to this left hand side. So I don't think it will be strictly him playing really high. I think he will drop deep at times, but he can play here. Obviously, the other option is for him to play in one of the deeper roles. Now, this is a bit of a contentious thing because Caicedo is so good that I feel like he always starts, regardless of what the game is. So playing Enzo next to him would probably be the most common option if we were to play with these two as the pivot. But obviously we've seen from Maresca's teams that he likes to play the right side of fullback here. In this case, I've put Gusto here. We'll get on to other fullbacks in a second. So we're not sure if he would actually do that with Enzo, and I don't think that he would play Enzo here with the fullback. I don't think that's something he would do. Obviously, we have the question of Romeo Lavia too. He can play in one of these positions. He could probably take Caicedo's position, and I feel like what they might actually do this upcoming season, because we have more games with the Conference League, etc. I think like these two will do what I spoke about with Jackson and Sesko, where they will interchange, and one of them will take this position, or if one of them gets injured, obviously they will swap in for each other. But yeah, going back to Enzo, that is pretty much the two positions I feel like he will operate in, because we will play this system, and let's be real, Enzo Maresca is a bit stubborn. We've kind of noted that. He is a bit stubborn. He will play the system regardless of the personnel, and I feel like if Enzo is going to play, he has to play in either this advanced position, which we've kind of seen in reports that apparently Maresca has a plan for Enzo, which is good to see. We like the fact that our best players are being already have plans of how they're going to be utilized, whether that is in this advanced position or in a slightly deeper one like we kind of theorized is yet to be seen. But I suppose we'll just have to wait and see whether Enzo Maresca actually plays him in a higher role or a deeper role. Now the next player I want to talk about is one that is very, very contentious, because I think he is going to be the linchpin to how this team actually operates, and that's Reece James. Gusto obviously has been an excellent right back for us, but I don't think he's suited particularly well for the midfield job, whereas James absolutely is. And if we are going to play this way, with the same way that Enzo used Ricardo Pereira when he was at Leicester, James fits this team and fits this system so well, and I think he will operate here 100% of the time. And if he stays fit, this is where he will play for the majority of the season. Obviously, he will be coming off of the right-hand side into midfield, so he won't always be playing here. In defensive scenarios, he will be probably playing back if the counter press gets played through, as we kind of spoke about in the last video. But for the majority of the time, I think he will play here. And we've seen from his previous games, back when he was on loan in the Championship, and when he's played here in some games under Frank Lampard, for example, under Tuchel, for example, he can play here very well, and this doesn't particularly limit his creative attributes, I don't think, because not only can he be defensive in this scenario, he can get forward. He can obviously move out into these scenarios if he needs to support the wide men, and obviously if Palmer is up high, he can move into this type of position and create crosses from here. But also just I think that his deep line playmaking from this position will be very valuable to us, because as I said before, obviously Caicedo can play as this lone player if he needs to, and he can get higher up the pitch. But even from here, we can see that he can play the balls direct through the midfield to Enzo, for example. He can play the balls up in the air to Jackson if Jackson's making a run in behind. And again, it does kind of matter on and depend on how the opposition is setting up. If they play with a very high line, I think James is going to have a lot of opportunities to play balls over the top for our wingers. And obviously a lot of our wingers and our strikers do like to run in behind. Mudryk, for example, is a very big advocate for running in behind with his pace, and I think that's an option. He can always try and find that crossfield diag. I think the majority of the time, and I think this is kind of nailed on because of the way we've seen how Enzo has used Pereira and Chowdhury in his team last season, that I feel like James is just a nailed on starter for this position. And it's part of the reason why I'm a bit worried with Enzo, and we're kind of confused about where Enzo's going to be, because these two seem like the nailed on starters for these two deep positions, which makes me feel like Enzo is going to be playing in this higher position, which may or may not be a good thing. We'll obviously just have to wait and see. Speaking of right-sided defenders, the next player I'm going to be talking about here is Trevor Chalobah, because I think his position is very contentious as well. We've seen before that we know that he can play very well in this right centre-back role. Obviously, he can play as a right-back too. He can also probably operate in this position that we've seen James kind of play in, where because he can play in so many positions, he's so versatile. Obviously, the big question mark over him is whether he's staying or not. Obviously, we've been linked to Tosin Adarabioyo, and if that deal goes through, then I think that will signal the exit of Chalobah, even though Tosin is a replacement for Silva, who's just gone out. But for the majority of the time, I think if he does play, he will play in this right-sided role, which would obviously be actually right centre-back, and he'd shift out here when James inverts. Now, what that would mean, obviously, is that Disasi would not play. And I spoke about Disasi a little bit in the last game. I feel like he does suit this team very well because of how good he is at playing direct passes through the middle. And I think that is something that we saw a lot from Enzo Maresca's team last year, with Yannick Vestergaard, who is very similar to Disasi in a way. They're both very big, very tall, strong defenders that do have an eye for a direct pass. And I don't think Disasi is going anywhere, if I'm being honest. A lot of people have been calling for him to be sold. I don't think that's going to happen, especially as I've mentioned previously, with the extra games. We're going to need more centre-backs. We can't always rely on Wesley Fofana's fitness because we don't know how fit he's going to be. If Wes Fofana is fit, then maybe he takes Chalabar's spot in this right side, or maybe even Disasi's. For now, we'll move Disasi out of here because I don't think he will play in our starting 11 if Wes and Chalabar are fit. If we have Tosin in the team, I don't think Disasi will start. But the one thing which I will say is that it depends on Cucurella's position. And now this is a big elephant in the room. Obviously, we've seen Cucurella inverting into the centre mid position for these last few months, and a lot of people, and I suggested this, that he could play here as well, but I don't think that's going to happen in all honesty. I mentioned that is an option. I don't think it's the one we will take. James is the more likely to invert because of how his quality in this position, and because of how Enzo likes to set up his teams with the right-sided defender going into this role. So I don't think Cucurella is going to play here. The thing which I will say is that I don't think this immediately means that his position is gone. I think he does have a role to play in the team. He can obviously play in this left centre-back role. We've seen him play there before for Brighton. We've seen him play there under Graham Potter. He can operate in this left centre-back role. The only issue, of course, is the fact that he's very small in stature and will not help with the aerial problems that we have. Even though we're bringing in new set-piece coaches and stuff, having that height disadvantage in those areas is not the greatest, especially when you have to be the man that's blocking the cross. What I do think will actually kind of happen is that I think Cucurella will likely actually fall out of the team. Colwill will probably play in this left centre-back / left back role that we kind of saw Pochettino use him in before, and I don't think that will particularly harm him because of the way that this team operates. He won't really be playing as a left back for the majority of the time, and he isn't limited by this sideline, which I've spoken about previously. He will be operating more over here, where he does have the space to play these passes. Obviously, the one thing we know about Colwill is that his long passing, his long distribution is his greatest asset. Even though he's a very good defender, very competent defender, the best thing about him is his ability to pick out passes. And in this side, where we're going to have a lot of possession, having very comfortable centre-backs that are comfortable on the ball is going to be a very big bonus for us. And whether he can play those direct passes, like I spoke about with Disasi, is another thing. We'll have to see whether he can do that or not, and I think that will be one of his tasks in this side. Obviously, if he moves out here into this left back / left centre back role, that probably signals the fact that Disasi will play in the centre role. And if this isn't Disasi, then it will probably be Tosin. If it's not Tosin, then it will probably be Wes Fofana. But I think this will probably be the strongest lineup we have from our current players. Obviously, if this is Tosin, I think he will start over Disasi because I do think he is better than Disasi. Very, very good bit of business if that does go through, so we'll have to wait and see whether that happens. But yeah, for the centre-back positions, and specifically for Chalabar, I wanted to mention, I think this will be how we set up. If Chalabar does leave, because that is definitely an option, then I do see either Disasi or Tosin playing in this right-sided role. If not, probably Wes Fofana will play on this right-sided role. We've seen him play there before. He can obviously get up and down very, very quickly because he is a very rapid player. He can play in this position, and I think that he would kind of seamlessly slot into there. It all just depends on whether he stays fit. Now, another player I wanted to talk about is another midfielder, and this is an interesting one because of his relationship with Enzo Maresca and the fact that they have had history with each other, and that's Cesare Casadei. I think that he's become the forgotten man in this team because he is going to be 100% involved in this team because we know that those two have a good working relationship. The question is, where does he play? Because he has to play in one of these positions. We know that he can play in one of these positions. He can probably play a bit deeper, but I don't think that's going to happen with the fact that I said these two are pretty much nailed on starters. So I think genuinely he would probably take Enzo's position in this side, and I think he would be a rotational player. I don't think he would play here from the start. I think he'd probably operate in here, or as I've kind of mentioned before, he could probably play in this like false 9 kind of position. He is strong enough and tall enough to be able to do that. I think he can play there. Do I think it's going to happen? No. I think he will be a very valuable bench player, and I think that at the end of games, I think Enzo will probably throw him on to try and get an aerial advantage in the middle, or for if we're trying to swing in crosses to get a late goal. I think he could be a very good threat in the box. That's where his main threat is in the box. So I think that he'll operate there. But I did want to mention him because I think that he's going to be a very reliable squad player for us, especially considering how many midfielders we're playing, and again, with the amount of games we're going to have next season. Now, the final player I'm going to talk about here, and if you have any more suggestions for players you want me to talk about, let me know. I'll address them in a future video. But the final player I want to talk about is Cole Palmer, because I did see a lot of people kind of worry that he's not going to be as impactful as he was this season, as he's not playing in quote-unquote his natural position. I think he's going to operate basically the exact same as he has for the last few months in this inside 10. Obviously, he's going to be very close to the striker. We've seen Enzo Maresca's side play like this. I think that he's going to just basically continue off how well he was playing last season in this kind of inside 10, and obviously he can interchange with Madueke. Whether that happens or not, I'm not sure, but he can play out on this right hand side as well, and this may be an option that Enzo decides to take if he wants to play, for example, Cassidy in one of these advanced positions, or Nkunku into one of these advanced positions and play Madueke on the wing or Mudryk on the wing. He can definitely do that. Whether that actually happens or not is yet to be seen, and obviously Palmer can play on the right wing, and I've kind of mentioned it in the past that I think that Palmer is very good when he comes off of this right wing and comes into the inside positions and then can create from there. But I don't know if he's particularly the greatest one-on-one winger, and obviously we've spoken about it in the previous section there, that I feel like he can operate as a winger, but the importance of actually beating your man 1v1 is something that this system really relies on, and whether Palmer can do that consistently or not is something we have question marks over. We've obviously seen him play on this right wing spot and beat players occasionally, but it's not his natural thing. He doesn't really want to run at players and go to the byline. He's always going to be a player that wants to get onto his left foot and then create players. He is more of a midfielder than a winger, I would suggest. Whether he can play in this role is another thing, another question that we'll have to find out, but I definitely feel like he can operate here if and when Enzo wants to overload the midfield with extra players. Obviously this may be a position that Enzo takes up here, and obviously we can get Nkunku in this role where Madueke is currently with one of the wingers out there. I did mention before that Mudryk would probably be playing on this wing unless we bring in a new winger, but there's another suggestion is that Madueke could probably play there too. Obviously he's not naturally a left-sided winger, but he could obviously play there if he needs to. And it all just depends on who's going to be playing in this right wing spot, because if Madueke is playing here on this right wing spot, then Palmer is 100% starting in this inside 10, and whether we see that basically changes the rest of the team. And it is a very fluid system, and we obviously can see interchanges between these two, and we are going to see different rotations. I think there is a lot of different setups we can do. The issue is, I think that Enzo Maresca, and we've seen this from the way that he's played with his Leicester team, as I mentioned before, he is a bit stubborn, and more so he doesn't really like to swap his players around. If he can stay with the same team, he is going to do that. Obviously we have a very bad injury record, so that may change things, but if he can stay with this same consistent lineup all season, he's going to try and do that. And I think that for the most part we are kind of seeing, as I've been forming it, we are kind of seeing our strongest 11. As I said, it depends on basically players that we get brought in. Obviously if Tosin comes in, I think that he takes the place of Disasi. If we bring in someone like Nico Williams or Somerville, he probably plays here, and Nkunku will come inside. What that does to Enzo's position, I don't know. I genuinely do not have the answer to that. I think maybe these two will just play interchanging with each other, and maybe Nkunku takes the Jackson role if Enzo's going to play there, if we need more control in the middle. And the other big question is Michael Olise, because we are definitely in for Michael Olise, and that is a rumoured transfer target of Chelsea. If he gets picked up, I don't think Madueke will start here. Obviously, I think that Olise would 100% be a starter for us, and if he does start, maybe then again Madueke could go over to this side, or Mudryk can play here. Depends on which type of winger Enzo wants to play on this side. In terms of a team that I feel is the strongest that we can field, I think it would look something a little bit like this. We have Georgi Petrovic playing as the goalkeeper. This may change depending on whether we bring in a new keeper. We know that Enzo Maresca likes to use a goalkeeper that is good with his feet. Whether Petrovic can play that way is yet to be seen. We'll have to wait and see. I've put Adara Bioyo or Tosin in the centre-back role, with Levi Colwill in the left centre-back role, and Wesley Fofana, if he can stay fit, in this right centre-back role. Obviously, James would be playing in this inverted right back role, with Levi Colwill playing in this left centre back / left back role, with Caicedo opposite him in the other holding role. Now, this could be Romeo Lavia, as I spoke about before, but I think Caicedo is just a bit more consistent in terms of his injury record, so I put him in here as our starting centre defensive mid. Up into the more advanced roles, I've put Enzo in the left-sided 10 with Palmer in the right-sided 10. I've put Nkunku as the left winger. Even though he's not a natural left winger, I think that he can play here, and I think that a lot of the time he will come more inside if Enzo drops deep, or these two will just interchange and swap positions, with Nkunku going into the centre and Enzo occupying the right fullback at times. I just felt like this is the best way for us to get both of these two into the same team, because they kind of occupy the same role. And obviously Nkunku is one of our best attackers, Enzo is by far one of our best midfielders. Leaving out either one of them would be silly in my opinion, so I've shoehorned them both into the same lineup by putting them here, by compromising Nkunku's position a little bit and playing him a bit wider than he'd usually operate. Over on the right hand side, I've put Michael Elise. If he does sign for the club, he will 100% start in this right wing role, and I think that Noni Madueke would obviously be sacrificed in that regard. Palmer would obviously play in the central 10 role as well, as he has been doing for the last few months. I think these two would be a very dangerous combo, and they would be interchanging again. They would probably be swapping around, and Elise can play in this central role as well if he needs to. Palmer can obviously play on this right hand role if he needs to, so I think these two will be swapping around quite a lot of the time, which will be good. Finally, in the striker role, I've put Nicholas Jackson. Obviously, we know how good his hold-up and link-up play is, and I think that's very important to the way that this team works, especially with the striker usually dropping deep to create the 5 in midfield. I think Jackson is the perfect candidate to do this. If we do bring in Sesko, I think he will just be another type of option, and it depends on the opposition that we are playing. If we are playing a team that is going to suffer against a bigger, stronger striker, I think Sesko will probably play. If not, I think Jackson is probably the best option here. We've seen how good he can be. Let's see if he pushes on next season and can do even better than he did this year. But yeah, that is just the strongest 11 that I think that we can field. Whether Enzo Maresca decides to do this or not is another question. I suppose we'll just have to wait and see. But if you can't wait until then, YouTube reckons you'll enjoy one of these 2 videos in the meantime. Thank you guys so much for watching as ever, and remember, in the rain or in the dry, keep that blue flag flying high. Come on, you Blues.